Welcome everyone. My name is Craig McNally, and this is the Folio Security Team overview. Today we'll be looking at the security team, what it is that we are, who are we, what are the things that we do. We'll learn about how we learn about vulnerabilities, and what the life cycle is for dealing with those vulnerabilities, making sure that the appropriate teams are notified and are working on remediating those things, as well as disclosure, how we handle false alarms. Then finally, we'll look at, how can we improve? Because I think we're doing pretty good, but there's always room for improvement. And then links to additional info and some questions at the end. So I'm not going to read this all verbatim, but essentially the Folio security team is works in close conjunction with the technical council, where we report to them. So membership changes and so forth need to be approved by them. And essentially what we were charged with is overseeing the identification and resolution of security vulnerabilities within Folio. So members have come and gone on the security team. We've been around for a few years now. This is sort of who's active at the moment. There have been other members that have since sort of moved on and haven't been participating much lately. So it's myself, Craig McNally. I'm sort of the unofficial convener, responsible for the meeting notes and agendas and so forth. We have Julian Laddish, who's a really big contributor. He does a lot of the triaging, managing, the JIRAs and so forth. Big help there. We have Jens Heinrich as well. Ryan Berger and John Coburn. Those are sort of our resident UI experts on the team. And then, of course, from Texas A&M, Kevin Day and Chris Rutledge. All right, so what is it that we do? We have some official responsibilities that are in our mission statement, and some sort of unofficial or voluntary responsibilities as well. So officially, we're charged with triaging reported security vulnerabilities, and those come from all sorts of different places. We'll get to what those avenues are for reporting vulnerabilities. And then, as I mentioned in the agenda, also, what is the life cycle for getting these things remediated, triaged, and so forth? And then, of course, communicated out, because disclosure is an important part of the life cycle itself. Unofficial and voluntary responsibilities include things like sort of ad hoc or manual scanning or testing, providing advice to other parts of the community, whether that's development teams or councils or whatnot. And sometimes we even draft security-related policies. There's been one or two cases of that, and we can take a closer look at that as well later on. Not listed here, but I wasn't exactly sure where to put it. There's several tools that we use, and we'll get into the details of that as well, for identifying security vulnerabilities within the Folio code. And so we do have, we play a role in helping maintain and administer some of that stuff as well. So there are a bunch of different tools, and we'll get into the specifics of the tools in the next slide. But they all sort of fall into one of these categories. The most common one is software composition analysis, or SCA for short. This is looking at the POM files or the package JSONs. Essentially, what are your third-party dependencies? Are there known vulnerabilities in those dependencies? And so we have a bunch of tools that are doing those sorts of scannings, right? Next up is static application security testing, or SAST. And again, we have a lot of tools that are doing this, ranging from SonarQube to Sneak and some others, where it's looking at the actual source code itself and trying to determine, hey, this is a bad idea. You're taking user input and sticking it directly into a SQL statement. That's a big no-no. So it's identifying things in the code itself. DAST is something you may have heard referred to as like black box testing. This is where it's a simulation of a real world attack. It's not necessarily manual. It's sometimes semi-automatic. There's some tools that help with doing this sort of thing, but it's actually, instead of looking at the source code, it's treating the application as a black box and trying to exploit it. And then finally, sort of related to that is penetration testing, which is conducted often by security professionals. This is their full-time job to sort of put their hacker hats on and try to break into your software. And so we do a little bit of each of these for Folio. Taking a closer look at the tools themselves, or not necessarily just the tools, but how we learn about vulnerabilities. Certainly things can be reported by folks in the community themselves or that are adjacent to the community, but also just, maybe you're subscribed to RSS feeds or security related blogs that are just more general, not specific to Folio, but software vulnerabilities in general. Word of mouth. So what we do get questions from time to time on whether or not Folio has a bug bounty program, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with what that is, but essentially if someone reports a vulnerability, will we give them some money in exchange? So it's sort of as a reward or bounty. And the answer is no, we don't have that, unfortunately, but we have had people from outside the community report security vulnerabilities. So the important part here is we do have a safe harbor statement, which is basically, feel free to report any vulnerabilities that you're aware of or that you find. We're not going to come after you. We're not going to sue you or anything like that. Getting into the tooling itself, Snyk and SemGrep, I'll cover these together. These are similar tools. They do similar things. You can see here that they're both a combination of SAST and SCA. They're complementary in that what we see oftentimes is one of these tools finds a vulnerability that the other doesn't. And so it's nice to have sort of some overlap there to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. SonarQube, if you're a developer, you're probably most familiar with this one because it's sort of our first line of defense. Whenever a pull request is open, there are some checks that get run, and that includes checks against SonarQube. So it's looking at your code itself for vulnerabilities, and reporting them, getting the developers that early feedback. GitHub, there's a couple different things here. GitHub has advisories that they post, but also there's secret scans they're looking for. You checked in an API key or some password into your repository. There's some notification about that, as well as some other SCA related tools as well. ZAP, or the Z attack proxy, is a tool from OWASP. It is the one DAST tool on this list. The ZAP tool typically scans for the OWASP top 10, which is a set of vulnerabilities that are really common, sort of high visibility things. And that one is it's not an ongoing continuous scanning like these other tools. It's something that is more manual or ad hoc. And we've done one or two of these scans where we stand up Folio. I think the last time we do was maybe Casnelia. It's been a while. So we probably are due for doing this again. And we run this ZAP tool against it and then review the findings. External to the Folio project, there's also some penetration testing that EBSCO does on a per flower release basis. We get the report from the vendor. And oftentimes we review it with the vendor, and then myself or maybe others will go in and try to actually reproduce this in like a snapshot environment or Bugfest, and then subsequently we would file the security issues in Jira. We also do some Prisma scanning. Prisma is another SCA tool that EBSCO is using. This one's actually looking at the Docker images themselves, and so you can see that maybe there's some redundancy here, especially in the SCA realm, where we have a lot of these tools that are looking at this. But they, like I mentioned before, Snyk and SemGrep, those are complementary. Also, some like the Prisma scans and stuff, these are also complementary in that Snyk and SemGrep and sort of the tools up here, those are scanning the tip of master, so the bleeding edge of your source code. Whereas some of the external testing that we're doing, the Prisma and penetration testing, is done against release code, flower release that's been often in production for a while. And so you do run into situations where Maybe you're finding something in the release code that wasn't found on master branch because it's since been fixed, and oh, you know what, maybe we should backport a fix for this to Ramsons or Sunflower or whatnot. And the opposite can be true as well. So getting into the life cycle, now that you can see the first step is an issue is filed, right? So I mentioned it could be coming from someone in the community. It could be someone on the community the community security team themselves who's filing the issue in response to one of those tools popping up a notification or finding a vulnerability. So we have a security JIRA project. It's in all caps. Whenever you see it in all caps there, I'm referring to the JIRA project. And the issues there are automatically embargoed. So what does that mean, to embargo an issue? It means that it's essentially hidden from everyone except for those that need to know about it until we have a chance to patch it, remediate, and so forth. So the idea there is that you don't want to be advertising your vulnerabilities, especially as an open source project. All of our resources, the Confluence, the JIRA, all that stuff is wide open. Anyone can go in there and look. And so you don't want to give a potential bad actor or hacker a recipe. Here's all of our vulnerabilities. Go take your pick, whichever one you want to exploit. So we embargo these things. When you file a security issue, the only people that are able to see it are you as the reporter and the security team. And then the security team goes and we do some triage. This typically happens in between our weekly meetings. And what does that mean? We're trying to figure out, are we actually affected by this? Is this something that affects Folio or not? And oftentimes we aren't. There's a false alarm. Maybe we're using a vulnerable library, but we're not using that area of functionality or those classes or whatnot. Or maybe it's specific to Windows and Folio, as you know, most of our Docker images and everything are on Linux-based base images and so forth. So there are a lot of times where the triage ends up is coming to the conclusion that, yeah, we're not actually affected by this. Issue creation, this is referring to not creating issues in the security project, but creating issues for individual teams, sharing just enough information with them so they can patch the necessary code, right? So when we get a security issue, sometimes they'll even have proof of concept code for what an exploit might look like, or details on how to exploit the vulnerability. And so again, we don't want to be advertising that stuff. So we'll strip out some of that information when we're creating issues for the individual teams that need to make the code changes. And we'll just reveal only the details that are necessary. So it's worth mentioning that the issues that we create for individual teams, once we do that, it's we'll often we'll make sure that the product owner or that team is aware of it, of course. But at that point, it's sort of on their boards. It's part of their workflows, whatever those workflows might be. Security team doesn't go in there and move things across various columns in their boards and so forth. We manage our security issues, and we have a workflow for that. And we'll link all of these sort of constituent issues for the various teams to our security issues so we can monitor that and say, aha, okay, there were 4 teams that needed to make changes here. Those 4 teams have closed their issues. They've released the code. So now we can close out the umbrella security issue. Backporting and CSP approval. So I kind of touched on this earlier. So it's not uncommon that we need to backport something. So a vulnerability was found in the master branch, and you can look and say, yep, we're using the same vulnerable package in the last 2 releases. We probably want to go back and backport this to some of those. So the rule here is that if it's cross-cutting, if it's touching a lot of different modules or a lot of different teams, it's the security team's responsibility to seek that CSP approval from the release management stakeholders. If it's specific to one team, and that isn't all that uncommon either, the responsibility lies with the product owner of that team to seek the CSP approval. So at the tail end of this life cycle, we have review, closing, and disclosure. So once all of the code changes, once everything's been patched, we can see that as we're reviewing our security issues on a regular basis, and we can close the security issue, and at that point we'll unembargo it. We'll make it visible to everyone. And so that's the disclosure part. And I kind of already touched on false alarms before, but sometimes we'll skip a lot of these steps. We'll triage something and determine that it's not affecting Folio at all. And so there are no issues that need to be created. There's no backporting that needs to happen. So we'll go directly to review. And we have some processes internal where we leave a comment in the security issue, and then other members of the team will go in there and give a thumbs up or raise additional concerns or whatnot. So they have a chance to weigh in. It's not just one person that's doing the triage who's making the determination. It's a group effort. We all sort of approve the decision. All right. So severe issues. From time to time, we have 0-day vulnerabilities or really severe issues that crop up. The one that comes to mind, you can't see it on the screen here because it's blocked by the Zoom thing, but is Log4Shell. You may remember this from a few years ago. This is a huge security vulnerability, not impacting just Folio, but almost every Java project out there. And so how do we handle situations like this? Because it's not the day-to-day, it's not a usual thing. In these cases, it's typical for us to have sort of an ad hoc meeting to within our team here to get on the same page, understand what the situation is, who's affected, what do we need to do next, and so forth. And in these cases, we use something called responsible disclosure. We'll get into exactly what that means in a minute. We kind of already touched on it a little bit. But then we'll also share details and remediation advice. This is actually a link to our wiki space where you can see some examples of this. And if we have time at the end of the presentation, maybe I can pull that up and so show you guys firsthand what some of that looks like. But oftentimes these pages have information like, how do you determine if you're actually affected or not? Are there workarounds? What do those workarounds look like? And what is the recommended fix? All right, tracking. So yeah, sometimes vulnerability is reported and you may or may not be affected right away, but because of the nature of the vulnerability, maybe it's a worm or a virus or something that self-spreads, it changes from day to day. We need to do some ongoing sort of monitoring or tracking of this stuff. And what we've done in the past is set up GitHub actions that sort of do some scanning. Maybe it's semi-automatic or manual. You kick it off each day or something, just to see. We did this for Log4Shell and in a couple other things as well. And so you do the scan and it shows you, oh, these 10 repositories are vulnerable. And then you do the scan the next day. And you see, okay, now we're down to 6. And the next day, okay, now we're down to 2 and so forth. And then eventually you can phase out running it once you're confident that all the teams have patched their software. So it's internal to us. I'm not sure if that's actually exposed to others or not, but we do things like that all the time. And then at the tail end of whenever we have one of these events, these sort of severe stop the world situations, we like to have a little retrospective to discuss amongst ourselves. How did it go? Did we handle this well or not? What are the gaps in our processes? And how can we do better? And there's been some good stuff that's come out of that in the past. All right, so responsible disclosure is basically it's a vulnerability disclosure model where we're not telling the whole world. We're telling a handful of people that are responsible for, say, sysops, or maybe it's the Folio councils, to sort of spread the word internally, give those folks a chance to patch their systems before advertising that, yes, there was a vulnerability and some of this data could have been leaked or whatever it is, right? So give the folks that are responsible for hosting these systems a chance to patch their systems before announcing it. Otherwise, they're really scrambling. The potential bad actors are getting the information at the same time as those that are hosting it, and that's a bad situation. It's often a really thin line you're trying to walk here with who do you notify and when, what does the messaging look like, how much detail you give to who, and so forth. And that even goes back to some of the, like I mentioned on this one, the issue details and remediation advice. Fortunately, Confluence has access controls baked into it, so you can control who can see which pages or which spaces and so forth. So we need to be careful not to advertise our vulnerabilities, but we also need to make sure that we're making those that need to know aware of this stuff and make sure that they have sufficient details. And so, yeah, responsible disclosure typically is measured in days or weeks. I think for Log4Shell, it was a couple weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And there have been other cases like this as well, but that's the one that really sticks in my mind as a big event. False alarms. Yeah, this happens a lot more frequently than you might think. With all the sort of the plethora of tools and scanning and sources of these vulnerabilities, we oftentimes get issues or vulnerabilities reported that we're not actually affected by. There's a lot of overhead associated with this, but it is what it is. There's not a ton that we can do about it. We do our best to try to avoid wasting anyone's time, including our own. And so another part of this is these sort of automated tools that are continuously scanning our software. Whenever we find that a vulnerability doesn't actually affect Folio, there's an extra step here to go into those tools and mark those vulnerabilities as ignored or not affected or whatever it is. So it's a semi-automatic process. The only semi-automatic part about it is that I have some scripts that I can use to help do some of this stuff in Sneak, but generally it's more of a manual process than you might expect. And I already mentioned sort of ongoing monitoring. Some of these things morph, and so you just need to keep an eye on it. All right, so how can we improve Folio security? So the couple things here. This is sort of an overview. We'll dive into some of these items in the upcoming slides here. So first up, adopt secure coding practices and standards. So in an ideal world, all developers have some sort of baseline training on secure coding practices, right? And I don't know if that's actually true or not. My guess is it's not true in the Folio community. I believe EPAM developers get some training like this, but I can't speak to all the other developers across the board. And so it's something that I think we could maybe raise awareness of and maybe make some progress there, because that's where all this comes from, right? We're writing code, being aware of some of these secure coding practices, understanding what a SQL injection attack looks like, vulnerability looks like, and so forth. And avoiding those things is critical. I wish I had ordered these a little bit different, so I'm going to skip over the next one and come back to it. By identify security champions. So these are typically experienced developers who have been around. They've dealt with security vulnerabilities before. They've patched their code. They've gone through this time and time again, and they're basically acting as advocates. So these people are, the example that comes to mind is on the front end side of Folio. I know that there are some individuals that have a rotating responsibility to review PRs across the community. And these folks, they've been around long enough to know, hey, while SonarQube didn't pick up an issue here, this is not a great thing to be doing. You should probably rethink how you coded this, or you should do it this way instead of that way. And I think while we don't acknowledge these people as security champions, I kind of think of them that way in some ways. So I think doing more of that in the community is another area where we could improve, and maybe even acknowledging those folks and the work that they do would be good. Going back to review anything AI generated, I know that Copilot and generative AI has sort of reshaped how developers work, and it's a huge productivity boost. But there have been a lot of studies and a lot of articles posted about how this AI generated code can lead to vulnerabilities. It's not always secure, and I think that's the assumption that some developers make. So it needs to be reviewed. You need to be careful. You'll see in a slide coming up that the numbers are actually very surprising. Get more organized. So I kind of touched on this, not to sound like a broken record, but this stuff is coming at us from all different angles, all these tools, reporting vulnerabilities. It's hard to stay on top of what's what, especially with all the overlap between things being reported in multiple places, and you're looking at master branch and release code and all this stuff. So it's important that we consolidate all that information into one place so that we can then better understand where things stand. Are these tools really reporting the same vulnerability or not? How long has this vulnerability been? What is the gap between reported and remediated? And can we shrink that time? What can we do better there? So there's been some progress there, and I'll share some details with you in an upcoming slide. Asking for our input. So we're reaching out to the community here. The reason why I came up with this presentation is because I got some feedback late last year. There was an informal survey, I think, amongst some of the EPAM teams. Do you know what the security team is? Do you know what they do? And the answer was pretty much, I don't know. Sometimes we get a vulnerability. It's always at the worst time, is sort of like their view. We don't know. They sort of operate in a black box over there. So I thought it was important to get the word out, sort of demystify the security team, what we do, who we are, and maybe make us seem a little bit more approachable because we don't bite. So if you have, maybe there's a disagreement between two developers or a team lead and another developer on what the right thing to do is here. And maybe you're designing a new feature or you're implementing something that's sort of security adjacent or something like that. We're happy to weigh in on that stuff and provide some guidance. We can't tell you what to do, but we can provide some recommendations and suggestions. We're not necessarily security experts, but we've been working in this area for long enough that we're probably more familiar with some of these concepts and topics than the average developer, I would say. And along similar lines, other ideas. So if you have ideas, if you've been on a team and you've had security vulnerabilities dropped in your lap at a really inopportune time, I'm sure you're frustrated about that. If you have ideas for how to better manage this stuff, how to handle it better, we're all ears because we're in this together. The security team is part of Folio. We're not trying to make your job as a developer or a product owner or a council member difficult. We're just trying to make sure that Folio is secure. Go ahead, Mark.
These acceptance criteria include review, positive review of the security team prior to.
So the question for those online was, would we think it's a good idea to have to change the release acceptance criteria to include something about security? Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I don't know exactly what that would look like or how it would be enforced. But yeah, I know that different teams have definition of done, and it varies from team to team. And in some teams that might include, SonarQube is reporting 0 security, vulnerabilities. Other teams may not be as strict about that stuff. So it might start with the definition of done and then bubble up to sort of the project-wide definition of done, which is a release acceptance criteria, right? And do we have anything documented about what that criteria looks like? We do. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about here for other ideas or input. I think that's good.
Is it acceptable to do it afterwards?
Mm-hmm.
Information obtained after.
Yeah, the question was about penetration testing and the timing of it. Is it acceptable to run it after release is GA, or should that be done prior to GA? I think the answer from my perspective as a security team member is the earlier the better. And that might actually result in fewer CSPs and so forth. But I don't know what the mechanics of that might look like. That's essentially up to EBSCO and who's running these penetration tests, right? Or contracting a vendor to do the testing.
Last question. You mentioned that there is time involved in managing vulnerability. Sounds like you developed some scripts or developed some manual steps. Would it make sense to look for vulnerability management software by their commercial offering.
Mhm.
And then since Sean's here and signs the checks, then, that, would have an impact on folio budget, but it would help with, vulnerability management.
Sure. Yeah, the question was about that get more organized point and whether we should look into security or like tracking software or some software that's commercially available to help us get more organized. What I've done, and you'll see this in a little bit, is I built something, I've generated some scripts and so forth, but that's a classic situation, build or buy, right? And maybe it makes more sense to buy. I don't know. We'll have to have that conversation. I think, I honestly haven't looked at what's out there. That might be a good idea, a good next step before we make any decision on whether we should build or buy. We need to understand what the landscape looks like, what's available, what it costs, and so forth. Yeah, good question, Mark. All right, careful with AI generated code. So just a couple snippets from some articles here. There are two of them. The first one is a little bit older. I think it's from 2024, but it's very thorough. It includes methodology, details about all. It's essentially a white paper, right? The second one is more of an article. It's about Veracode and some broad statements that they've made. But the big takeaway that I got here is some of these numbers in the second article are really sort of surprising to me. I didn't realize that it was this bad. But the study analyzed 80 curated coding tasks across more than 100 LLMs, revealing that while AI produces functional code, it introduces security vulnerability in 45% of the cases, which is alarming. I don't know how accurate this is. Again, they didn't get into their methodology or how they arrived at these numbers, but so it could be hyperbole, but it's needless to say, it's those numbers are staggering, I think, and it sort of highlights the fact that you need to be careful with this stuff, especially where some of the code that gets generated might actually get fed back into the model itself. And so you're sort of perpetuating some of these bad practices by doing that. So interesting stuff. Be careful if you're a developer, please. Here we're getting into the consolidation of and so the organized part, right? So here's a little bit of what I've done recently to help us have a better understanding of our security posture within Folio Security Team. So I developed some simple shell scripts that basically pulls down information from Snyk, and then puts it into Elasticsearch. And I have this running just locally on my own laptop. It was sort of a proof of concept to see, is this worth doing? Is this worth pursuing or not? And the answer was absolutely. It's been a great help for us, I think. Fortunately, I already had experience with Elasticsearch, Kibana, and Shell, so it wasn't a ton of work to pull this together. It does provide much greater visibility and continuing monitoring to a bunch of things. So you can spot some trends. Are the number of vulnerabilities being reported greater than or less than the number of vulnerabilities that we're actually fixing and closing? And so I'll show a screenshot with some of the trends and sanitized dashboard in a little bit. But you can also see it'll easily highlight where some of the new vulnerabilities are. So you're immediately that day, I run these scripts every morning. That day you get notification, there's a new vulnerability reported, and it's been found in these following repositories. You may be wondering, why do we need this if we can just go to Snyk? Snyk must have a dashboard that shows this info. Yes and no. The Snyk dashboard is limited in functionality in that you can drill into a given project, a given repository, and see its vulnerabilities categorized as, critical, high, medium, low severity, whatnot. And there's a bunch of links and information about it, but you can't just put in a CVE or vulnerability identifier into the Snyk dashboard and get, these are the projects that are affected. And that's the kind of thing that we often need to do. It doesn't tell you, it has some historical information there, but not sufficient to be able to see, okay, this vulnerability was found, 23 days ago and it still hasn't been addressed or whatever. So with this is sort of time series data, I'm getting it each day, putting it into Elasticsearch, it's time stamped, it allows you to do some of that analysis and highlight some of the hotspots as well. So, this project over here has very few vulnerabilities. This one over here has a ton, that sort of thing. Or there's a single vulnerability. It only impacts one module versus a vulnerability that impacts 24. And so maybe that's where we focus our effort initially, is those sort of high impact areas. This is just a sort of a little bit more detail what this looks like. You can see on the bottom here, we have various sources. Right now, the scripts that I have running only pull data from Sneak. I think SemGrep is the next logical source to pull data in from, and then maybe do some deduping and so forth. SemGrep fortunately has APIs that well documented, that you can just use, and you can generate like an API key to start calling these things right away. I started to look at it real briefly, but I haven't got into the details of it yet. It also might be helpful to pull in JIRA information. Say, okay, so this was reported, this issue was found by Sneak or SemGrep or whatever 10 days ago, and we still don't have a JIRA for it. What's up with that, right? So the next step here, as I mentioned earlier, this is all running on my local laptop. I'm the only one that has access to it. And I've actually had a couple scares where, an update was run on my laptop over the weekend. I come in on Monday morning and things aren't working. What's going on here? Fortunately, I was able to get things back, but for, my heart skipped a beat thinking I just lost all that data. But getting this sort of formalized up in the cloud somewhere where the other security team members can access it would be a huge help, I think. It would remove me as a bottleneck, because currently I'm the one that's sort of reporting this stuff and looking into it and so forth. And the security team obviously does help. I started creating security vulnerabilities in JIRA based on the Sneak findings reported, but it's really time consuming. So more recently, I've been sharing the necessary info with the security team, and they've been helping with that issue creation. Big shout out to Julian Laddish as well, who's been helping out there a lot. So you probably can't see this, but the details here are lost because these things are so scaled out, right? But these are actual screenshots that I've sanitized, by the way, because we don't want to be advertising our vulnerabilities of the dashboards that we have here. So some of this stuff in the top left corner there, these were actually using summary data that Sneak sends out like a weekly digest. It reports here the number of projects that you have in Sneak, the number of dependencies, the number of vulnerabilities, and so forth. So that actually goes back, I think, a year, maybe more, and sort of shows the long trends, right? We have breakdown by severity. So, green being low, yellow being medium, red being high, and black being critical. And that's on sliced and diced a bunch of different ways, right? On a per week basis in the top right, but then just below that on a per project basis. And one of the first things that I noticed looking at this stuff was the top N. I want to say it was like the top 5 or 6 contributors to security vulnerabilities were not actually runtime code. There are things like the integration tests or the Cypress tests or the Helm charts or whatnot. And so that's it's really misleading to look at the number of vulnerabilities reported by Sneak and say, oh my gosh, we have thousands of vulnerabilities. It's misleading because it's skewed by some of these things. And the way that the Sneak scans work is it's not just reporting a vulnerability once and say the Folio integration test. It's reporting it 140 times. So there's the nice thing about this in Kibana is that it allows you to sort of filter that stuff out. So you can create filters that ignore certain repositories, and it updates the dashboards accordingly and so forth. There's really powerful tools here. I won't get into each and every one of these. We are pulling in, like I said, summary data. Then there's also sort of at a more fine-grained level, one script that I have that pulls in data for each of the repositories or projects and just says, okay, we have 4 highs, 3 mediums, and 10 lows, or whatever it is, right? And that's populating some of these charts as well. And then more recently, I started pulling in actual vulnerability data from Sneak, which is there's this vulnerability. Here's the various IDs for it. It could be a CVE, a CWE, a sneak ID, a GitHub service advisory ID, whatever. Here's where it was reported, all these details. And that's where we really get the value here, because you can see there's a sort of table on the right-hand side on the bottom that's highlighting all the new vulnerabilities that were reported in the last month. That is the go-to. Whenever I look at these, it's the first thing I look at each day, and that is, okay, what's new? What needs to be reported in Jira now? And sometimes I do it right on the spot if it's a high severity thing or that's affecting a lot of modules, or sometimes I give the tools time to sort of catch up, because the sneak scans are happening on a continuous basis, and we have, 300 plus repositories. And so they're not all scanned every single day. Sometimes it takes, a week or more to get through scanning every single repository. And so something might be found today and reported as affecting 12 repositories. And then tomorrow it's 14. Then the next day it's 30. And then over time, after you get all the repositories scanned, you'll have the full picture of, oh, it's actually 123, right? And so in order to save from having to go back and update the JIRAs with it affects these modules. No, it affects actually these and these other ones. Sometimes we'll delay the filing of the JIRA by a little bit. And again, there's a balance there, fine line that we're walking. So really powerful. There's not just the dashboards. There's also a really powerful query engine. You can say, give me, all the vulnerabilities from this date to that date that have this ID, and exclude these other repositories and really complex things. And then you can drill into that information and get visuals really quickly. So really powerful stuff. If there's something, to your point, Mark, that does something similar off the shelf, and saves us from having to do all these integrations like I have on this slide, or, well, we need to pull information from Jira, and what does that look like? What do they understand those APIs? And then from SemGraph, what do those APIs look like, and so forth? Because that's a lot of work. If we can get that for free, not for free, if we can get that without the development costs, but by buying something, maybe that's an attractive option as well. So moving right along, I think we're running close to time here. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, so we're pretty much right on time. Here are some links to additional resources. We have so the first one here, Folio Vulnerability and Remediation Policy. If you want to nerd out on the details of what the security team's processes actually look like in writing, that's what that is. There's the charter, of course, which touches on our charge and what we're supposed to be doing. Already talked about the safe harbor statement. Some of these are a little bit legalese. It's kind of tough. It's not light reading, right? But if you're curious, the resources are there. And this last bullet point is an example of a policy that we, I think it came from Julian initially, that the security team sort of endorsed and proposed. The TC reviewed it and then made it policy. So this has to do with a deprecation policy for modules that were contributed to Folio. Maybe they were maintained for some time and then fell out of maintenance, and that there's no one to maintain them. And now these things have severe security vulnerabilities. What do? This policy basically says, if that's the case, if we can't find someone to maintain it, let's just deprecate it. Let's just get it out of the picture altogether. So with that, I'll leave you with a fun little comic. I don't know if we have any ex-KCD fans here. This one is a little bit famous. The Bobby Tables comic is what it's often referred to. There have actually been websites created called, I think it's like bobbytables.com or something like that, which teaches people about SQL injection and links out to various resources. So yeah, with that, I'll open it up to questions. Any other questions here?
The security guard with data privacy.
Yeah, the question was whether or not the security team touches on or deals with privacy issues, or if we're solely looking at security issues. I think our charge is specific to security issues. I think members of the security team always, have some of these other things in mind as well, whether that's licensing or like you said, privacy. My understanding is that there's actually a privacy SIG out there, and so I think they're probably better suited to ask any questions about privacy. It's not part of our daily, weekly routine to talk about privacy stuff, but sometimes it comes up in the context of what is the impact of this vulnerability? Well, this could expose personal data, so in that way, there's some overlap, but it's not something that we're not looking at the personal data disclosure forms or anything like that.
First off, thank you for offering this session. Very helpful. Second, Mark said, as the group gets together and thinks about what tools need to be provided, there are to the council's your way to support that. My question is about the deprecation policy, and I've been thinking throughout your whole presentation is, and this is not meant to be existential, what is Folio, and does your wiki really outline what you're scanning to call Folio to find these vulnerabilities? Can I go somewhere and understand what you're scanning so you have a sense of what Folio is and for the security?
Right. Yeah. The question is, what is the scope? Is there a wiki page or something that describes the scope of our scanning and so what's under the purview? What does the security team consider Folio, right? And to my knowledge, we don't have a wiki page that outlines that. But the simple answer is we scan everything that we possibly can, including there are some in some cases where we've forked repositories that aren't under Folio.org but used in Folio software, so that we can scan them. And then those might be in one of our personal GitHub spaces or something like that. But we'll update those frequently and make sure that those findings are part of our scanning. So yeah, if any repository pretty much in Folio.org is being scanned right now. Yeah, so it's pretty comprehensive. Alexi?
Based by other stuff, but we know that the real source of security issues is development needs. Yeah, and there are two ways how we can reduce number of security issues. It's react to things like these tools that perform scanning and proactive. So, and in case, my question: are there any plans to ask dev team to be more involved in the security processes, like extended and additional done, some checklist, maybe additional scans from code base, etc. And there are some security issues that can be found by performing the static code analysis. It must be related to some implementation or textual things. Like an example here, putting a token to the Kafka message.
Yeah.
Probably a security issue, but any of such a tools can say that, okay, it's a problem. You can put anything in this Kafka message.
Yep.
So are there any plans to make share it across all development teams?
Yeah.
Best practice.
Good point. Yeah. So try to summarize that for the folks online. The question was about, what is this security team doing to engage development teams a little bit more, as they're the source of a lot of these issues, right? To encourage best practices and so forth. And I think the answer is, yeah, we could certainly do more there. We can't tell teams what to do. We can't directly tell them, here's what your definition of done must include. But I do think that the security team could very well provide recommendations or suggestions. We strongly recommend that you have X, Y, and Z, or that you read this, 20-minute article or whatever it is, right? I think there's more we couldn't do there, and it's a good point. It goes back to an earlier slide. What can we do to improve Folio security? It's actually the first one. Adopt secure coding standards and practices, and spreading the word there. Maybe engaging the teams and their corresponding member organizations to help encourage developers to take a, a simple online course or something about secure coding. I think things like that could go a long way for sure. Stop.
Develop.
Yeah. Yeah. Just don't develop anything, right? And you don't have to worry about vulnerabilities. All right. Any other questions, guys? Oh, in the back? The question was whether or not the Folio Security Team would stop accepting vulnerability reports for older versions of the software. The security team essentially follows the support policy from Folio, which is I believe it's the current release and the previous. And so because there's so much information, I think anything older than that, anything that's gone out of support is sort of off our radar at that point. Just because there's just too much to deal with as it is. Having to, having an even longer support period for security issues is problematic, I think. Okay. Thank you all for attending. Enjoy the rest of WOLFcon.